It's 7:32, and we're starting this meeting of the RTM
So,
Finance and Budget Committee. Um, the agenda is short, but let's I'm going to the town administrator budget first. Um, and I want to share one of my screens. Let's see how I'm going to get this done. Hold on. Oh, yeah. Okay. Um, The town administrative budget was given at a very high level on Tuesday morning. Unfortunately, the there was a problem with the operator of recording the meeting, so the first 10-15 minutes of the meeting was not recorded, which is when Jen presented this budget. I did get to speak to Jen subsequently because I thought I could watch it on the recording, and unfortunately, case. Um, And so she told me some of the basic areas that's going on here, and I'll go over them very briefly. So you can see the operations budget is up 6.17%. We're going to go through some of the detail of why it's up on that. The library has a slight adjustment coming in, but they're going to be under 3%. And you can see debt service is up $2,500. I want to remind you that we're still doing bans on several of our debt. So because of that, we're paying interest only on those debt, not the not principal, any pay down on the principal. So even with rolling some of those over next year, we're not seeing the full effect of any of the schools at this time. The other non-tax revenues are up only slightly, and there's certain grants that we get from the state that we didn't get this year, even though we budgeted. So we're not budgeting for next year as well. The shared sales tax is one of that. And based upon the fact that we're actually looking at the investment income from July rather, of this year through June of 26, where we can anticipate, at least in the market, that, oh, um, I got to get back to the waiting room. Hold on for a second. Um, you, you admit, admit, admit. Sorry. Progress. So as I was saying, that we're not seeing the full effect of the debt income on the investment income. That was planned for four 25-point reductions over the next, really, from now, over the next almost 18 months, for reductions. And so that's a significant loss there. Um, she goes through some of the other things, the significant variances. They are looking at other ways to fund the medical insurance. There's some salary increases. Um, that's the facilities positions that only had a mid-year from the prior year that were added in, I believe, December or so. The waste contract has gone up because we're not being paid for certain things. There's a request for a new fire administrator, a PD officer for full year. There's some tree maintenance, new deputy fire marshal, some other management, the sidewalk consultant, and other things like that. If you go and look at what they're requesting on the capital side, and again, Pear Tree is an estimate, but it does include the dredging and that. Um, if you want to find more about Pear Tree, there is going to be a tour on that, but also at last night's P and Z meeting, which I actually caught part of besides the Board of Finance meeting. Um, the you should have been let in. Um, the I got to go back to let people in. Hold on. Um, the fact of the matter is that there's a lot that they're looking to bond, but P and Z had a whole meeting on Pear Tree Point yesterday. So here's the thing to take a look at, and we'll be dealing with that. Let me unshare this document. Okay, you are in. Okay. Um, okay. So that's the basic overall budget that we have. Um, they will be looking at it February 3rd through the 5th and voting on the budget. So it's going to be really quick. I do want to go through the assignments because I did this in a different way. I went to each individual to see what they're covering and want to make sure that everybody has enough work to do, um, knowing what the size is. But there was also some gaps that we had. Let me get this off. Um,
You have to click on the share button again and turn it
yeah,
on.
that's what I'm
It's down
trying to
on the
do.
bottom.
Yeah, this one's up on the top right now.
Oh, okay. But on the bottom for me.
Stop share. Yeah, there we go. It's usually on the bottom, but because we had the other things, it all of a sudden went to the top, and that's where I was figuring where it was at the top because they hit it on us. All right. So let me just go through um, each individual and what we have here so we can go from there. Um, let's see. Louisa, I have you on the library, land use, and town debt. Um, Doug isn't here, but I have him on Board of Ed. Um, Peter D. Peter, how do you say your last name so I don't kill it?
It's pronounced Drape.
I would have killed it. All right, I have you. I I would have had. I have you on Public Works. Is that right? Okay, good. Um, Bill Dunn, who's not here, is on Community Environment, Park and Rec, as is Michael Q. Holly, I have you on general government and general overhead. And I know that sounds funny, but when we look at how the budget is presented, that's what they're going to be doing. So benefits, overhead, insurances, they separate out. It's not embedded in each of the cost centers. So all of healthcare and everything is in a separate area of the budget.
Okay.
So Beth, I have you on Board of Ed. Peter M., I have police, emergency, and fire, and also some work on the Board of Ed. Dan, I have you on police and emergency. I wanted to know, there you are. I wanted to know if you wanted to, I have somebody else that I'd like to join land use, which is P and Z, the building, and other things like that. And also, I'd like to have somebody else join general government, which is really all the administrative offices, tax collector, probate court, director of finance, town administrator. So, are you
I'd be
interested?
interested in that, Jack. The general
Okay,
administrator. Yeah.
super. Okay.
Okay.
Um, okay. Then, let's see, going down the line, Peter of Afanos, you're on Board of Ed. Charles, you're on fund balance, general list, and general overhead. But Charles, you there? There you are, Charles. Do you want to also do general government, I'm sorry, P and Z, the land use boards?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. And then I'm gonna do this. Um, Here I have you on the library grants and investment. And, and I wanted to know if you wanted to use.
Hey, Jack, you're talking away from your mic, so I don't think I can hear you.
Sorry. No, that's fine. I'm trying to write at the same time.
Okay.
So, so I'm looking to see, do you, let's see. I just put down Dan for general admin. Pierre, do you want to do land use? That's the P and Z in that?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay. There's a very good chair there. Amy Zebedakis is like one of the top zoning attorneys in Fairfield County, if not the state. She's heading that.
Yeah,
Bill,
she's awesome.
So just so I'm clear, I think you said library and then grants and investment, right? With you?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, we took care of that. Bill, I have you on human services, police and emergency services, and Charles is on the public works. You didn't hear what I'm on because I'm going to look at everything. So now, so how we're going to operate this year, which is slightly different, which is why we sent two people to the Park and Rec RTM meeting where they're talking. For the land use, Amy Zebedakis has one of her RTM meetings and she brings in Jeremy Ginsburg, who will explain his entire budget. So I'm proposing, I'll let you know when that meeting is. I've always shown up at that meeting because I love listening to Jeremy, because he's really brilliant on this stuff. But we'll go to their meeting. And then we can ask any budget questions we want then. And he does a great job explaining what's going on. The same thing for Charles and where are you? Peter D. That they are the Public Works group brings in Ed Gentile to one of their meetings, and they're going to do a deep dive into his budget. So those are in-person meetings, but if we show up at that, you can ask any question you have, and they're a good group of what's going on. I may expand a little bit because we also have a parking fund that deals with the parking lots, and we have the sewer authority, which is the sewer fund, which operates separate funds, but they're part of the budget. And Frank Alderman, who is in District 6, but on Public Works, is probably the RTM expert in what goes on in that fund. But we used to have some expertise in that and the parking fund, and we'll look to do that again. They're not really big, but they do have their own expenses. So the sewer fix that they just did around Weed Beach, all those expenses are part of that fund, their capital fund to do the fix. And in fact, anybody who's on the sewer line pays for it as part of their assessment. But, all right, so we've covered that. Is there any commentary on the Board of Selectmen? I'll be sending out additional information on when people are meeting and when your groups are meeting and being discussed at the Board of Selectmen. Typically, what does happen is we can ask questions after the members of the Board of Selectmen have asked their questions. So, we got to wait till they're done on a topic, then we can raise our hands. And if you have a question on the budget or something else, you can cover it at that time. It's better to get out ahead because I'd like them to have our input and our commentary prior to their vote on the budget. because it's always harder to get the horse once it's out of the barn. So, it's good to have these conversations with them early on.
Hey, Jack, I've got two questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
One is feeling like I'm getting behind the eight ball and understanding what meetings I need to have in my calendar as a F&B committee rep for these other assignments. So like, I thought it was helpful to be listening to the Board of Ed. Obviously, I don't need to be doing that. I'm not assigned to it, but it was helpful. I feel like I might be missing some of these, or I just
No,
don't
you
have
haven't
them in the
missed
calendar,
anything.
or else I'm ahead of you and you're just going to email out a notice that here are all the meetings we need to attend based on the assignments you just gave.
Well, that's what I wanted to get the assignments. So,
Okay.
I mean, there's a little thing, there's certain things that happen if you like, I joke that I don't have a life and I'm a town government geek. So I was speaking to the register of voters because they were at the department head meeting and they were mentioning something of what's going on early voting and the difficulties that a town like Darien has because we have municipal elections every year where certain towns only have them in the years that you don't have a presidential and you don't have a mid term election. Stanford's like that. Even though the districts for their local elections, or you could go to a different voting place than you did for the presidential or the midterms or when they're voting for the governors and other things like that. So I was speaking to them afterwards and the response was, oh, you actually watched the department heads meetings? And the answer is yes. So it's about an hour, it's an hour-long meeting, but once a quarter, all the department heads go and give an explanation of what just happened in the last 3 months, very high level. And there's a document that they send out also that I'm trying to get my hands on, which is just interesting to keep you up to date on certain things that are either coming down the road or in the areas that you're assigned. Listening to the Board of Ed, even though you may not be specifically assigned to that, everybody's really assigned to that. That's 70% of our budget in Reno. So, everybody's input is worthwhile on that. So I will though be sending out now that I have the assignments. Here's what's going on here. Here's the other meetings that I think you should try and get to. And I'll say whether or not like all the meetings that they're going to do on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th are all in-person meetings, but they should also be carried live. This used to be like a 1 week on the Board of Selectmen meeting, and they brought it down to 3 days. So they're going to just go right through some of this stuff.
And they're all recorded, so if we do miss it, we can go back and catch it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And there'll be certain things like that I'll suggest. Like as I said, anybody who's interested in Pear Tree Point, you can listen to the P&Z meeting, but the P&Z meeting was about an hour or more. So you really have to be dedicated to listen to.
I've sat through a few of those.
Yeah.
No.
I've had people ask me about P&Z, and Beth and I were talking about that in the state of the town, we always find the P&Z Commission's update for the last year to be the most exciting because that's the board we do not follow. We know what's happening in the Board of Ed. We know what's happening in the Board of Finance, and we know what's happening in the Board of Selectmen. That one I do not follow unless I really have to. So, but everybody finds what they find interesting. But you'll find Jeremy to be great.
I've had a lot of exposure to Jeremy over the years, so
Yeah, he's really a town asset. So
The other
Um,
question I had for you, Jack, was I think you reminded us at the last meeting, and I just to make sure I'm clear, even though we go to these different meetings, we don't really have line item input, right? So,
no, we do.
oh, we do on these. So why was that different at the Board of Ed?
Because the Board of Ed is authorized by the State Department of Education, and all towns do is give a total appropriation. Um,
Okay.
and
All right. So everything else is we fair game for us. It's just because of who mandates the Board of Ed.
Right.
Where they get to
now
okay.
on capital, any capital request
Mhm.
for both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, we have line item veto. So it's just this big thing. Many years ago, when the Board of Ed's budget was $50 million a year, it was many years ago. And we were talking about charter revision, and they were asking whether or not the RTM could add to a Board of Ed budget if we wanted to. The difficulty with that is we could, even if we could add money, we can't tell the Board of Ed how to spend that money. So, and my comment was that they have full control over what they ultimately spend. And my quote was, is if they wanted to buy $50 million of crayons, they could. They'd all go to jail, mind you, but they could buy $50 million of crayons. There's not much we can say of how they're going to allocate that money. So we'll make general comments, but we won't really get into the detail of, oh, we're not in favor of you cutting this or adding this or other things like that, because that's really their purview. So
Okay.
our
That was
purview.
helpful. I was clearly confused. So now
No, that's all right.
that makes sense.
This. It takes over a year, and sometimes two. It takes for the Board of Ed. It takes at least 2 years to understand the in and outs of their budget. And we're sort of lucky here because Beth and Peter, when they were part of the PTOs or other things like that, had budgetary responsibilities or were looking at budgets before they even joined the RTM. So they came with a little bit of knowledge. But even to board members that join the board for the first time, the basic thing is it's going to take you 2 years to understand that full budget, at least. And the town is not that much different because while we're breaking up the departments, we're going to be talking about the fund balance and what our limitations on that is. We're going to be talking about collection rates, how we determine what the taxes are, because we do some manipulation and there's some cushion in there that we do. So we will go through all of that, but we'll have that once it's getting towards the Board of Finance, because there's something that like I'm sort of already doing by taking the Board of Ed budget and taking the Board of Selectmen budget and then estimating what part of capital will be paid from taxes, what part of capital requests are going to be bonded, and what part of capital we're going to have because we have some excess funds coming in from into the general fund. So will the Board of Finance, and then we'll have to approve moving some of those monies to purchase capital. The general fund cannot be used to supplement operations in the budget. Now, if you have a special appropriation, you can use it, but we have to maintain a certain amount of money in there to get the AAA rating. And then we need to have some cushion in there because things come up during the year. But I've heard people go and say, well, we have all this money in the general fund. Why don't we apply it to the operating budgets? We're not allowed to do that. So, but as we go through the budget, you'll get it. But keep on asking these questions. because you may not be the only one who's confused.
I'm not shy, so it's okay.
No, that's
But
fine.
if anyone
Nobody,
wants me to ask a question for them, you can text me. I'm happy to sound like I don't know anything.
yeah, I did hand out the listing of everybody's email address and telephone number. I don't know if it's your cell or your home number, but whatever listed on the website, just so that if you need to ask somebody else a question or speak to somebody, you'll do it. I do not have the Board of Finance assignments yet for who's looking at what part of the budget. When I get that, I will be providing I'll be sending an email to everyone on what the group is, and I'll be giving everyone their email addresses and telephone numbers for the Board of Finance members. So, but the purpose of this is to communicate so that we all have a mutual understanding of where we stand on things. It is not just so that we funnel questions only once to the town administrator or to an apartment. We can do that separately. And in fact, some RTM committees may very well have a better relationship with some of the department heads than individuals on the Board of Finance. Because if you're Public Works, you're dealing with Ed Gentile all the time. If you're Park and Rec, you're dealing with Jen, who's the new park director, all the time throughout the course of a period. Amy deals with Steve Mulvaney and Jeremy all the time. So, that committee has a much better understanding, and she knows the other land use boards that are out there. So, that may be better than somebody who isn't dealing with it other than on budget from the Board of Finance, even though they have expertise. So, all right. Any other questions on their budget other than that it's 6%, which is outside of the guidance? And so they're going to have a challenge. All right. Next. Board of Ed budget. They had a meeting last night. I joined a little late. Beth, were you there from the beginning?
I joined about 10 minutes late, but
That's
caught up
better than
quickly.
I was. I was listening to P&Z.
I have no such excuse. So
no, you have a kid at home. I don't. Do you want to give an overview of what they discussed on their budget last night?
sure. I mean, the big areas were some of what we touched on in our letter. They discussed the athletics participation fees, different variations thereof. Do we, assess these athletes this much and other athletes that much, and how much would it raise depending on how we do it? And Rich Rudel also gave a quick overview of what other schools in our DIRG are doing as far as that goes. For anyone who doesn't know, DIRG is District Reference Group. It's the sort of the schools that are most similar to our district
in
the
our
state.
geographic area.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Wilton and New Canaan and Westport, and it's exactly the schools you would imagine. And there had been some talk also of assessing students a fee for joining clubs. So not athletics, but other clubs like Theater 308, or if you want to be in the Red Cross Club or whatever, also assessing a fee for that. But that is apparently quite uncommon. So there was a little bit of discussion of that. There was a lot of questioning of the whole paras versus interns thing that we've talked about some, and that they talked about at length in previous Board of Ed meetings. Sort of what paras are supposed to do in a day and what they've actually ended up doing, which it sounds like, at least from the principal level, it sounds like principals are aware that they're doing a lot of essentially substituting for teachers when teachers are going to meetings or other places. The paras are stepping in, so it's less sort of assisting a teacher while the teacher is in the classroom, and more of just almost acting like a building sub. So, but some paras have actually given a day in the life of a para that is quite different. So there was discussion of what happens then if we increase class size and eliminate the paras and instead have building interns who will be obviously neophytes and much less familiar with both the building and just being a teacher in general. Plus, we'll have to have 10 weeks of student teaching activities. So there was a good deal of conversation about that. And there will be more discussions next week. I mean, essentially, the board told the superintendent to take a real look at the administrative costs of running the district in the manner that we are, and to see if you can find more to trim there rather than trimming classroom teachers. So don't trim the people who are actually interacting with the children. I say that from a high level, that kind of summarizes most of what the meeting was about. Does anybody else who actually saw it have anything else that they remember that's not coming to mind right away for me?
No, I do want to add two things, just so if anybody else is listening to this, there should be no confusion about paras that are in K and first grade. If a child is receiving special services from a special ed para, they are not included in this para cut. That is based upon an IEP, and that child will still have their special ed para working with them. So, there has been some confusion from I've heard that, they're cutting the special ed paras. Well, they're not. So
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
And Robin Nelson actually asked the question of, would the special education paras be available at all to provide some of the coverage that the current paras are, in the event that the current paras are cut? And that way, Shirley Klein was very clear, you can't do that because those are there for an IEP and you're not allowed to cut them, or you're not allowed to shift them around for other stuff because they're there as part of an IEP.
Right. So the other thing that I wanted to say, and this is a fine line. There's recommendations coming from the administration. And I know some of these recommendations are a little tough. And it's easy for me to say I don't have any children in the school anymore. But I've always been a big supporter of the school system. But at times, we're paying some administrators some pretty handsome fees because they're experts in what they do. And, I've heard from other people from other districts, Dr. Adley is fairly well respected as a educator knowing what's going on. So sometimes when they're offering things, we may have to trust what the people in the education are telling us. And I know that comes from increasing a class size in grades 4 and 5 from 23 to 24. I'm not in a position, even if I was a parent, to say what the effect of that is going to be. That's not my expertise. But if they're saying it's okay, we may have to trust them in certain things here. And that's, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, that's their expertise in theory. So yes, it's better if it's at 23, but if they're saying there won't be a significant effect in 24, then we have to trust their judgment. Otherwise they shouldn't be there if they're not telling us what the educational value is. Now, I again would like to keep class sizes small, but I'm just making that general comment. So
I have can I ask you a question about the athletics fees?
yeah.
And I think that it seems that there's a lot of financial need what happened if it's a burden, becomes a burden, those athletic fees? Will be there a, somebody that will look at probably support?
So I think if I might answer your question, I had a conversation with Jill McCannon on this just to verify it. If a child in any activity is and their family are having some financial needs within our school system, there are funds from the principal or at the high school or middle school where, based upon financial need, the school and the town can supplement that child so that they're not burdened by it. And in the past, that was used for certain families to have their children go on, a school trip or other things like that where it's there. So that exists within the school system. It's also it's very confidential, so you don't know who is and who is not applying for it. And if a family does have that, then they just need to contact the head administrator, and they'll walk them through what needs to
Rich,
be. Yes, you can.
Rich said last night that if you qualify for free or reduced lunch, or if there are other reasons that you like a hardship, that there would be scholarships available for all the kids who otherwise would not be able to participate because of the participation fees. They would be waived in those cases.
Yeah, that has been something that as long as I've been in town, and as I said, my kids have all gone through, and my oldest is 40. That has been something that has always been available in this.
Okay. And there has been always enough.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's enough.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Charles, you look like you have a question.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Peter, you wanted to make some comment on the Board of Ed?
Just a couple of comments from last week's meeting, which I apologize for missing.
We gave you a hard time based upon that Charles called in from Sri Lanka, but go ahead.
Well, I was busy hurting my knee skiing, so I concur with you that we need the Board of Finance's support for the town in terms of the capital spending on the construction projects is important, and that needs to be illustrated. I do disagree, though, that those figures, that spending should be a factor in evaluating the merits or lack of merits in terms of the operating budget being presented. I do concur with Pear's comment on the budget process. I can't see how policy discussions about priorities, which are taking place in a highly compressed, pressurized environment, are effective. And I think that having these type of discussions outside the budget process would probably make for better decision making. I concur that there's there's a basket of reasons that people want to move to this town. However, the top of the heap of all of them by a mile is the schools. I see that. I confess it's anecdotal. We haven't done any polls, but my neighborhood, the district I represent, I've seen half our people turn over last bunch of years, and they all moved here because of the schools. I also believe that we do need to have balance with the Board of Finance and the Board of Education. They have as an attorney, I look at things from the point of view of authorities and responsibilities. And the Board of Ed's job is to produce the budget at the best cost possible that they feel leads up to our standards. And the Board of Finance's job is to produce a budget and authorize a budget that maintains our financial health to the best degree possible. However, I think that they, as you said, Jack, their guidance is flexible. I think there needs to be some flexibility on both sides in terms of how they assess each other's performance. And I think that's it. The one thing I'll say about the Board of Ed budget in terms of the priorities and what they need to cut, I think that we can't have everything. And for one example, when John Cini talked about uh, participation in football being important, and that not having cuts is important, I agree. I'm all for high school sports, but then if that costs a lot of money, so then there's something else has to go. Can't have everything. And I think what I'm get concerned about is we seem to be we want to have everything but not want to pay for it. So I think that's where we have to make tough choices, whether it be digging into priorities deeper, or maybe having some flexibility, um, from the Board of Finance and that side of the equation. So if in
Um,
fact that
I, I, I
guidance is
do,
flexible.
I do want to provide some information. When we put down that we wanted the debt service also part of it, as well as um, off-cycle funding that has occurred frequently over the years. It's not to say, oh, because of this, you can't have that. It's to provide the full picture of what the school system contribution to the budget of which we're doing taxes.
Yeah,
Because a lot of it is
Yeah.
out of sight, out of mind. And anecdotally, I spoke to a lot of people on Super Saturday who like forgot that we had to pay back the loans that we took out to build these things.
Jack, we
And-
concur on that completely.
Yeah, and
It's
so it's for information purposes more so than for an additional, oh, well, you can't have an extra 0.5% because we're doing this.
Yeah.
But on the other side, though, at the end of the day, it's the Board of Finances and the RTM's responsibility to decide what the max amount of spending should be. And then within the Board of Ed or even the Board of Selectmen, when they're doing that, it's them living within what we decide they're getting. And sometimes, it's very hard choices, if you're on the Board of Ed, to have to say, I'm all for education, but I'm going to cut this or I'm going to cut that, and other things like that. That's not an easy choice to make. I mean, in people's lives themselves, even if you're not serving on government, many people have difficulty making that decision of what you're giving up, or what you have to do when it may be unpopular. Um, one of the difficult things when you have kids to tell your kids no. But that's unfortunately part of the job. And you're right. You can't have everything. And while we want it, that's fine. The other thing, I'm going to be unpopular, I'll get 3,000 emails from this. I moved here from the school for the schools. But there were 3 or 4 other communities I could move to whose schools were equal to Darien-Ann's. I mean, there's like 5 schools in this basic area, and they're all top-notch schools. What was our family's deciding factor, and again, this was a long time ago because more things have moved up here, was the commute into New York City. New Canaan was too far, Westport was too far, and this was a better commute. And so that was one of the final deciding factors. And as somebody else said, and we found a house that we could buy at that time. So, schools are very important, but there's a couple other places where a lot of other people who've actually moved to town are. Now, we got to keep our schools good, but we also have to keep some of the other things here good so that people, as Charles said last meeting, you want people to stay around after the kids have gone out of the school system, because that's what builds a community. That what builds diversity, in what goes on. And so it's again finding a balance.
Yeah, Jack, I agree with that. I actually think the best way of doing that is keeping on maintaining the schools at their current level, at the best level possible. That's what will keep people here and keep
Okay.
that sense of community that he talked about. we come to the same place from different reasons.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Jack, just one question. Who comes
Sure.
who comes up with the guidance numbers, and how is that number determined? And you've been involved for years and years. Is the guidance increase every year always roughly 4%, and you have to stick within that guideline, or
No, the gardens used to be less. So, and then during COVID, we actually moved, and F&B was not necessarily happy with how they came to that conclusion, but we kept it at virtually a zero budget. And then we actually ended up shifting money over to the Board of Ed because of the needs of what they had during the course of the year. So we gave them supplemental funding, of which some of it came back. But the Board of Finance makes that decision, and it's based upon what our debt service is going to be, what other areas of income that is, and all those are on the town side. So the other thing, when you're looking at the budget, the Board of Ed budget is a net budget because they have certain revenues that are netted against their expenses when we give them the full appropriation. On the Board of Selectmen side, it's all the expenses, including debt service, which the Board of Finance actually controls, not the town. You have capital, which includes the Board of Ed's capital and the town capital, and the town side of the budget. And then you have their operating expenses. The operating revenues, and there's certain funds that are there, are not netted when we look at the Board of Selectmen budget. What they do is we figure out how much money we need to fund, and then we take those revenues off of it, and then we say, okay, this is the amount that we need to fund through taxes. And then that's how that's calculated based upon the grand list. It's a mathematical number to determine the mill rate. So they've actually increased it by the 4% this year. Typically, over the last couple of years, it was 2% for core and an additional 1% for growth. So it was about 3%. So, but they're responsible for setting the guidance. And they had a discussion at the Board of Finance meeting. Jim did this analysis on building a model that if the operating budgets came in here, if we had a growth in the grand list, as an example, if the grand list grows by $100 million during the course of a year, well, even at the old mill rate, we're going to end up with an extra $1 million in our funds, because we have the grant list is up by $1 million. So we end up with extra funds there. We end up with monies not spent by the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen that end up back swept at the end of the year back into the general fund that allows us to use that to pay down certain capital. We also have at times, we've overestimated certain capital projects, and so their excess costs are moved into another contingency that can be used. And then we have investment income that sometimes grows a bit more and that sometimes is less. Now, part of the reason why investment income has been up much more than it ever. I mean, 5 years ago, over the last 10 years, the most we made in investment income was $1 million in this town. The reason why we have more is that our taxes are more as our budgets have grown, which means we have funds that are being invested until the cash flow requires it. We have debt service that when we do go out and bond something, well, it's what we're anticipating is going to be spent in the next 6 months. So that money is invested. And so we have more money being invested, which has also increased our investment income, but also rates have been high. So the combination of those have given us additional funds that my term was we were masking some of the costs to really run this town. because the growth in the grand list, the increase in excess funds, we're going to make $4 million in investment income this year. We only budgeted 3.3 million. So there's an extra $700,000 that we can use from this year's excess to pay down next year's taxes. Up until the loss of the ECR, the Board of Ed was running a surplus in their budget, which meant that we could have gotten a couple $100,000 more from that budget being returned. So all those little things is what the Board of Finance takes into account to say if the operating budgets are between 4 and 4.5%, based upon those other things, we can end up with a mill rate increase of 3%, 3.5%. And that we'll get to as we get further along. And yes, Pierre, that I know I have to show you in in one of the documents when I sent out, when you see me reconcile last year's mill rate to this year's mill rate, it lists a lot of those things. Some of the capital requests were bonding, so that took the request off. So it's all those little things that are going to be decided at the Board of Finance that will allow us to take operating budgets that are 4 and 5% and yet still have a more reasonable increase in the mill rate. Does that help explain it?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Jack, I have a process question.
Sure.
Now that Beth's letter has been submitted to the Board of Ed, what happens with that? And I know there were certain questions in there. Do we get answers to those questions?
Okay, my joke is they put it in the garbage can. But no, they don't.
That's not a joke. That's pretty sad.
No, actually, we
Because I thought
actually,
there were really good recommendations in there. I'd be curious to, do we actually get a response?
yes, we will. So, we first of all we had it in on Friday, but Beth and I talked, and life exists here, and we said we weren't going to do Friday. So I called up Jill, and she gave us a reprieve to give it to her later there, with the knowledge that we were not going to get answers on the special meeting that they had. All right. Now, some of that information we already have answers on, because at the end of the prior Tuesday meeting, I gave some financial questions to Rich Rudel to say, can you look at this? Can you do this? Like the public benefit. And he said, well, do you want me to look at every bill? And I said, no, if it's 20%, look at your total electricity, multiply it times 20%, and it's a rough estimate of what you spend. The next thing is we suggested, and they already have, Rich Rudel has sent an email to Jen Chinesky to know how the town is handling that, and they have communicated back and forth. So, I know what Jen already put in the budget, but it wasn't my job to tell Rich. Let the two financial people talk about it. And so I think that they're going to come to a consistent answer. On some of the process areas that we're talking about, I think we'll get that page that just shows, just for information, because it does show that the town is supporting our schools. I mean, we're doing a major building of virtually all of our schools, which is frightening because it means in another 20 years, I probably won't be living in town in that time, but in another 20 years, we're going to have to do this again. But it's for information. I tend to believe that'll be taken care of. Some of the comments were really supporting the board's position. And, we really don't like going into another board and telling them how to run their business. Nobody likes somebody. When I worked for Chase and I was doing work on the international side, I promised I would never be a seagull. And a seagull is, I'm from headquarters, I fly into land, I drop my stuff, and I fly away. And you can put in another word for stuff. So the concept is that you always want to work with them to find it, and the board has done a lot of work. They were discussing in October, November. Rich Rudel had listed all these new initiatives that they're potentially going to do and what the potential costs for them were. They're talking about new things that are coming on. The capital is really discussed in November in a Board of Ed meeting. And then after they got the guidance from the Board of Finance and they had their meeting in November, the Board of Ed had a meeting with Dr. Adley to say, we want you to come within this guidance. And that was before he, obviously they're working on the budget from September on. You don't just come up with a budget like this in a week. But then that's where they started to look at some of the modifications and other things like that. Part of the budget really starts for the Board of Ed in August. And the reason why it starts there is that's when the board agrees to what the goals for the year is going to be. And so in most places, you set your goals and then you try and meet those goals. So that's some of the initiatives we're seeing. So they met and said to him in December, this is the number we have to come in, and they go there. We're asking to have some of those same conversations on paras or IDEA or other things like that earlier in the year. And if they want to talk about personnel, even though their offsite is typically filmed, they can go into executive session to talk about changes to personnel and keep it private. So, and I've had that conversation with several. On the questions we put at the bottoms, we'll get specific answers to. All right. On some of the other policy, we'll get some on board members that will agree with us and some that won't. And we may hear it verbally, we may not. We did get a response from one of the board members. Beth, do you want to give a review of what that said?
Is this
Just
working?
general.
Okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
Just general. We don't have to get into great detail, but
Well, I got actually I was sort of under the impression that everybody had gotten it, but I didn't really pay attention.
everybody had gotten it. Jill distributed it to the administration. We sent it to the chair of the Board of Ed because that's who we're giving our response to. We're not giving it to the administration. It's up to the Board of Ed chair to communicate to the administration, and the chairs will distribute it to all their members before.
Yeah, and of course I read it and now can't find it because it did not stick in my head very well, given the other stuff that was going on with me yesterday. So
I think I'll give a highlight. So
it was from John Cini, and it was excellent. Like really went into some detail
on some of the things that they're trying to do to meet some of the things that we suggested, especially in the early budget aspects. But sometimes when somebody writes back to you, you're not sure whether or not it's favorable or not favorable. So I did ask, I asked Jill what she thought, and she was happy with our comments. She's happy that we kept it at a very high level. And she thought it was a very positive input from the committee. So on the bottom part, we're going to get answers, those final questions at the bottom. We're also, I've had some conversations, especially on the across the board, one fee for everyone, as opposed to this non-SEAC sport thing. I have communicated my thoughts to several people on the board. Just saying, from just a general purpose, it's just a lot easier to charge everyone the same. Especially since these parents are already doing a lot underwriting for the rentals and other things of their children's schools. So,
Yeah. Oh, well, and I will say, I mean, it's a comment that I've been making at the Board of Ed for some time that I like more evenness amongst the different teams. And this is with no real justification heading in a different direction. And I've yet to hear a really clear statement of why it is that they would charge separately for a non-C export versus a C export. It seemed arbitrary to me.
well, to use what I like, Peter and Mike Heitz's, the late Mike Heitz would say, it's arbitrary and capricious. Is that your term?
Mike would like that.
Yeah.
He
So,
would.
yeah. So, and that's why we asked for the rationale. I didn't think they had given any. So, you have a choice. You can give us a rationale, or you can just make your life easy and charge the same tariff. So we'll see how the board reacts. But yes, we will get answers, not so much on the process, but you'll hear some people, if you have relationships with board members, some will say, we don't like what you said, and some will say, yeah, we like what you said. So it's not stopping us from saying. So with that, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I have Pierre to it. Do I have a second? I have Peter M. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it is now 8:35. And can I take a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
I have Pierre and I have Beth again. All in favor?
Aye.
And this is more like the timing that we'll have in our meetings. We'll talk about things, but it's an hour. And especially when it comes to September, October, and we're getting into playoffs. So sorry. With that, thank you all for joining. And I will get out a set of minutes saying, here's what you should do. You have an option to do it in either way. And if I'm there, you can always text me a question I can ask you. All right. So with that, I'm going to end the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.